of malaria, a biocultural approach. So that would you. Here she is.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for coming to my job talk. Today what I am going to do is discuss my research program that demonstrates how anthropology can be applied to conquer or at least help alleviate some of the problems that are facing the world today. And to start with, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of a background on malaria. Many of you are probably not too familiar with malaria unless you have traveled and come down with it yourself, but it is a protozoan parasite that is transmitted by mosquitoes. Today in the world, about half of the world's population is at risk for developing malaria, and about 1 million people die each year from this disease. Most of these deaths, about 70% of them, occur in children who are under 5 years of age. There are 4 common species of the Plasmodium genus that occur in human populations. The most deadly is Plasmodium falciparum, and after that, Plasmodium vivax is one that is spread pretty much globally throughout the world. Falciparum right now is limited to Africa and Brazil for the most part. There are 2 other ones that are not as a big deal today as they were in the past. One is malariae, and the other is ovale. And ovale is also found in Africa today. The malaria one was mostly in subtropical areas and Europe as well. Now, the infection process varies depending on the species that infects you. There is one that's really virulent, and it can cause death within 3 days of becoming infected with it, but it doesn't impact very many people. It's limited to a small region of the world. With Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium malariae, they cause a single infection. That means that to become reinfected, you have to be bitten with another mosquito. Now, vivax and ovale, they actually have this resting stage. The parasite will rest in your liver, and it will reinfect you. And this reinfective process can occur for years. And what happens when the malaria parasite gets into your blood is it actually consumes up to 75% of the hemoglobin. So it causes anemia. In some cases, very severe anemia. Okay. From an anthropological perspective, you might be familiar with the work of Livingstone, who was a professor at the University of Michigan. And he did a lot of this really great research with sickle cell anemia. And he found this link with the malaria parasite and this adaptation of sickle cell anemia in certain populations. So there are certain genetic things that we can do, or we have evolved over time, that have caused changes in the protein of hemoglobin that gives us an edge in environments where there are malaria. You're really obviously most familiar with sickle cell anemia, but things like thalassemia and G6PD deficiency are also quite common, and they're similar. Some other cultural adaptations that we've developed over time include building modifications, the use of DDT. Back in the 40s and 50s, the Disney company actually had a video that was out with the 7 dwarfs that they would show before movies, showing you how to modify your home and prevent malaria. And it's pretty amusing. I'll share it with you later if you're interested. Okay, so right now, in terms of malaria research, it's largely conducted from this biomedical paradigm perspective. That is what we're looking at, for the most part, or researchers who are doing work, are focusing on the disease process itself. What types of medications can be developed to fight this parasite? What types of pesticides can be used to combat the disease vector, the mosquitoes? Unfortunately, what happens is the mosquitoes and the parasites, they evolve. So after about a period of 10 years, you'll see resistance the mosquitoes and the Plasmodium genus in areas where what they were doing before was actually working for a period of time. Now, unfortunately, social scientists haven't really been involved in malaria research for the most part, and when they are, in terms of numbers and ratios, when they are, what they usually focus on are things such as access and the political, economic factors, the access to drugs and treatments, or adherence to the medical regimens that are prescribed by physicians. What is largely lacking from an anthropological standpoint is looking at different cultural adaptations, because in some regions, people do not have access or consistent access to really good drugs. Sometimes they can be counterfeited or stolen and sold on the black market. A lot of times this occurs in areas where there's a lot of political unrest, malaria outbreaks. So by identifying cultural adaptations, it could be used in conjunction with the biomedical approaches, kind of as a complementary medical procedure almost, to help people reduce their chances of becoming infected. So the first phase of my research really didn't start out as malaria research. I was interested in studying violence and child abuse, and I was talking to my friend who is from Sardinia, which is an island off the coast of Italy, and he said that there was this really interesting burial that I might be interested in looking at. And as I did my research, I realized that the burial that I was interested in could actually be representative of a disease outbreak and not necessarily violence. And then I learned a lot about malaria in Sardinia, found out nobody's really answered a lot of questions about it, and so I ran with it. I saw an opportunity and I took it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, or what I'm hoping to do with this research, is identify more cultural adaptations. Also to test for the presence of malaria itself in prehistoric populations, too. In Sardinia, this is one of the most malarious regions. It's the Campidano Plain. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sardinia, but it kind of has a bad rap in terms of malaria. Historically, it has. The rates of malaria were so high during the Roman times that the Senate and rulers such as Nero would actually banish their enemies to Sardinia in hopes that they would become ill, right, and die a painful death. However, other people kind of debate if this is actually the case, because it's thought that actually Rome itself may have been more malarious. So there's a whole political and economic thing going on there with Sardinia way back in the day, too. If you look at historical documents, they will reconstruct the spread of malaria in this fashion. However, in Sardinia, is right here, in case you didn't know, this is Italy, Sicily, and Corsica, and the coast of Africa here. Scholars debate this reconstruction for the most part. And they've come up with a few different hypotheses. One, that it was introduced during the Neolithic with the adoption of agriculture, and when they started changing their subsistence strategies and introducing more agricultural-based methods, or that it was introduced in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, when trade increased with the Aegean at that time, or it was introduced right before the Romans took over during Carthaginian domination, which is about 500 BC or so. So my research, what I did is I thought, okay, I have these skeletal remains. I'm going to test this hypothesis. I want to know, did these people have malaria or not? So I looked at some skeletal remains from this Bronze Age tomb to do this. Now, I didn't limit myself to this research, just to the skeletal evidence, obviously, because there's more to it than that. What I wanted to do was take a really good biocultural approach and look at it from a holistic perspective. And I standpoint that encompasses or includes human behavioral ecology, cultural evolution, cultural ecology, evolutionary medicine, even the political economy of health models that are out there. I also considered my data sets more broadly. I didn't want to just rely on the archaeological evidence. I wanted to expand it. I wanted to consider the ecology of the time. Was the environment able to support this malarious parasite and mosquito disease vector that is required to transmit it? I looked at data that was collected on modern populations, people who were living at the time of malaria outbreaks in Sardinia, and then of course the biological information too. So my goal is to identify health-related behaviors, and in terms of different categories, you'll see here that behaviors can fall into a couple of different categories, and one involves the intention of the actor. Is the behavior, are they trying to do this behavior to modify some sort of health outcome? And then the other is the actual health outcome itself. Is it beneficial or deleterious to the population? Okay, so first I'm going to start with the archaeology, and since we're limited on time, I'm going to kind of give you just a pretty brief overview. The period that I focus on is the Middle Bronze Age, or Nuragic one, which is highlighted here. Something I want to note is before the Bronze Age, and actually back into the Neolithic, there was this extensive trade network. So there was this contact with different populations in the Mediterranean during the Neolithic too. Okay. The Bronze Age in Sardinia is generally considered to be a time of warrior pastoralists. And when you look at the subsistence patterns, they generally are thought to have been these pastoralists, but when the archaeological data is taken into account, this is not the case. And there's not really any evidence of this warrior nature to them either in terms of osteological research. There's not really much evidence of violence. And this is going to be important in another slide coming up. But also, during the Bronze Age, they still use lithic tools, but you start to see this smelting activity occurring and intensifying, and this can also impact health, so that's an important facet as well. And the trade networks at this time also expand into the Aegean, and if you're up on your literature on King Tut, you'll know that he was infected with Plasmodium falciparum. So there is this indirect association with the parasite in question. If you've ever been to Sardinia, they are famous for nuraghi. There are 7,000 or more of these structures on the island of Sardinia. And they can range in size from something smaller than this room to something larger than this building, depending on where they are and when they are. It's interpreted that this, obviously, you would need some sort of elite status and considerable wealth to construct one of these nuraghi. It's almost like prototypes for a castle. And this slide gives you a pretty good perspective because this is just the forecourt or the foreground area. It's not the actual structure itself. A couple of other interesting features during the Bronze Age represent this ritual or ritualization surrounding water. And they have sacred wells and temple wells. In this case, this is a sacred well. And it is, there's stairs that go down to it. You can see that too well. Probably if you turn the lights off, you can see that. That's what it looks like from the ground. And if you look down,